And one phrase I like is honesty with kindness, because you can give honest feedback and not have to be mean about it.
Right.
You really should want the person to get better. And that's why I like the term coaching, because if leaders are coaches, we want people to improve. We want people to develop. We want them to get better.
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations, folks. Audley Stevenson, and I'm back with another edition of the most audacious podcast the internet has to offer. You've got it locked to the Audacious Living Podcast, and it continues to be my pleasure to be here and continue our ongoing goal of helping our listeners live their best audacious lives ever. This is episode 240 of the podcast, and I'm happy that you could join us here as we welcome leadership development consultant and expert Jann Freed for a delightful chat on various aspects of leadership, including the importance of trust, feedback, empathy, and self-awareness. We also touched on legacy, making a positive impact, and ways leaders can be memorable. Like I said, it's a completely delightful conversation I'm sure you'll all enjoy. So without any further ado, here is Jann Freed. Enjoy. Hey, Jann, thank you for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. It's such a pleasure for you to be here. Thank you for making time to do this.
Well, I'm very honored. I'm honored.
I am the one that's definitely honored. So again, I'm always appreciative of individuals taking time, I guess, to chat about these really, really important topics that can help us get to better places in life. And so, I really appreciate you doing this. And we're gonna spend some time today focusing on something that you know very, very well, and really we're talking about leadership and the ingredients, if you will, of of a successful leader.
Yes.
And so maybe as a starting point, Jann, you can sort of talk about sort of your, I guess I was going to say your leadership journey, but what brings you up to this point here, that the work that we're doing, and the topic of leadership.
Okay, perfect. Well, my main career was as a college professor. I taught for only 30 years at a small liberal arts college in Iowa. And I taught business management and leadership. And my last few years there, I was granted an endowed chair in leadership and character development. So then I really kind of did a deep dive into leadership. And I had a leadership book come out in 2013. And then my latest book just came out this year, January 2023. So the previous book was called Leading with Wisdom, Sage Advice from 100 Experts. And the book that just came out in January is called Breadcrumb Legacy, How Great Leaders Live a Life Worth Remembering. And it's really for anyone. So the subtitle could be How to Live a Life Worth Remembering. So we can do a deep dive into that. I'll let you ask more questions. Yeah. So now what I do is I'm not teaching full time. I've been teaching a graduate leadership course, but I'm not teaching full time. Now I do speaking, workshops, leadership coaching, and always writing. So,
so one thing I'm curious is, Jann, I'd love to get your take on this, given how long you've been in the leadership development space and you've been teaching it, is what's changed about leadership over time?
Yeah.
Or is it always been what it always is?
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect question, because I've always been an advocate of servant leadership.
Okay.
And my definition of servant leadership is leaders should clear obstacles, not be the obstacle.
I love it.
And so servant leadership. So one of the things that I've been saying is one silver lining of COVID is the fact that employees, there's been a shift in power, and employees really feel more empowered. And we see that, in the Great Resignation, we
Yes.
see that in quiet quitting, we see this in, the fact that people are saying, we don't want to work for bad leaders anymore. We don't want to work for companies. I think people of all ages in the workplace are looking for meaning and purpose, and they don't want to be treated like cogs in a wheel. They want to be treated as people. And so one silver lining is the fact that servant leadership, which involves understanding, compassion, empathy, flexibility, is really now being expected by employees.
Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting, Jann, is once upon a time, those things were never even thought to fit into the scope of what, leadership is. And now it's so important.
Now, I've been teaching it for a long time, but command and control, it's just easier. It's faster. People think it's more efficient. It's more efficient in the short run, but it leads to burnout in the long run. So
Right.
It's definitely not more effective. That's for sure.
That's for sure. No, yeah, and we're seeing that more and more as time goes on, and it's you're starting to see less and less of that type of leadership style taking place.
Yes. Yeah. Which is good.
Yeah, no. The leadership as a topic has always been a fascinating one to me, because when you talk to different people, or you talk about their experience, or even ask them to define leadership or what they think leadership is, you're not going to get the same answer. And I think oftentimes it depends on that individual's own experience with leadership. So if they've always experienced and had, quote unquote, good bosses, for lack of a better term, if you will, their definition of what leadership is could be very different than someone that hasn't had those types of experiences. At least that's sort of my take has been. Is it something that you've come across or seen, or have you noticed at all?
Yes. And I think too many people end up in leadership positions without any training, development, without even giving much thought to it. And so that's why it's really important. My definition, first of all, a leader is someone, in my opinion, who's in the position to influence the lives of others. Right. So that definition includes pastors, teachers, coaches, parents, more than just bosses and managers. Okay. And then I think a leader needs to be someone who breathes life into people, projects, and programs. And too often leaders are suffocating. They're in the way. Like I said, leaders should clear obstacles, not be the obstacle. Right. And so, but I think the most important person to lead is yourself. So we are all leaders of our own journey. Right.
The one thing I've often I can remember, I don't know, I must have been 11 or 12 years old one summer day camp, and with day camp we used to go on these different trips and excursions, and it was within a group there were different age of kids, right? They're all sorts of ages. And I remember this one little boy, for whatever reason, kind of just gravitated to me, and we kind of hung out. He always wanted to hold my hand. And I remember one of the camp counselors saying, "Oh, you're going to make a great leader one day." And in my mind, I had no idea what that person was talking about. Like I literally, I felt like a babysitter in that moment, right? When you're saying to me, you'll be a good leader. And that's when I think my earliest recollection of sort of what leadership, when I started to even hear about it as a topic, if you will, maybe not fully understand it, but right. At least hear it on its own. And as I've become older, and your life experiences and things of that nature, I start to understand, what was being referred to. And it wasn't the title, because I didn't have a title, but it was the influence or the impact that I had on this young boy that wanted to, quote unquote, hold my hand and hang out with me. Yes, and that was very, very different understanding. I never would have thought that, actually. Yeah.
Well, that's part of your legacy now. That's part of your legacy story. Yeah. Excellent.
So I guess my point is, it's not babysitting.
No, it's not.
So if you were then to, Jann, identify sort of some aspects of successful leadership, what would you land on, or what would you share?
Well, I think first of all, I think what's really critical is trust. Trust is earned. And you earn it by trusting, you trust them, they trust you. Trust is a real reciprocal relationship. And so I think trust is important. And once you have trust, then you're starting to create an environment where, people will give you feedback because they know you'll listen, and
Right.
you listen to them, and you show compassion when it's, necessary. And you think about empathy and try to be empathetic with people, which listening is a really important skill for that. And understanding, and sometimes forgiveness. You don't want to be a boss that holds, grudges or looks for revenge. You just want to be honest. And one phrase I like is honesty with kindness, because you can give honest feedback and not have to be mean about it.
Right. Right.
You really should want the person to get better. And that's why I like the term coaching, because if leaders are coaches, we want people to improve. We want people to develop. We want them to get better. And so that's how I'd answer that.
And it makes sense. The part around, what leaders wanting for others, I think is a really, really fascinating one, because sometimes you sort of talked about people who come into leadership sort of not being equipped. And I think one of the things that new leaders need to understand, that it's less about them and more about other people. But when you're in a new leadership role, you want to ensure that you're competent, can do the job. You want to prove to others. You do make it more about yourself, and I think you lose sight of the mark at that point, don't you?
That's a very good point. Excellent.
Yeah, it sort of brings it really back into what leadership is supposed to be, I would say, in terms of it's not about me and my job and my role and my performance. It's what you really can do for other people. And I think the more people recognize that, right?
Yes.
I think the more effective they can be.
Exactly.
Why do you think the new leaders particularly are able to sort of, for lack of a better term, check their ego in this regard?
Yeah, well, I think it has a lot to do with ego. I think it has a lot to do with getting your ego out of the way.
Right.
And get it out of the way. In my book, I say, well, your ego's not your amigo often, that it gets in the way, and we have to be aware of that and get it out of the way, and shift the focus to, really, if you're a good leader, you're developing other leaders. And I think if we really want to know why people behave the way they do, we really should look at the reward system and see, what are we rewarding? Are we rewarding people for developing others, or are we rewarding them for just, making the numbers, even though people are burned out and disgruntled and,
Right. Yeah, that's a good point as well. What's really our focus, and because everyone comes into situations for different reasons and different motivators. And if your motivators focus on A, but really it's the other direction that everyone else is looking at, then you're gonna have connects, right?
Right. Exactly.
Man.
Yeah.
It's really enlightening in that regard. The other part that I find interesting is the piece around relationship, right? And that leaders can have with their people. And you sort of taught and you touched on some points like trust and forgiveness and understanding and empathy. All of these are important things, but without having a relationship of some sort in place, it's hard to get those things, right? If I don't trust you, right? I can't trust you if I don't have those things. What did you talk about?
Point.
Yeah.
I often say leadership is not a position and it's not a title. It's a relationship.
Yeah. So can we talk about how you develop this relationship, because it's almost, to me, and Jann, it feels like there's a fine line that you've got to toe, so to speak, where you're quote unquote, you're the boss, but you still want to have a relationship that allows for those things like trust and empathy and all those things to exist.
Right.
So I'm going to talk about strategy and how you build that type of relationship that's effective.
Well, first of all, you have to get to know people, and you have to let them get to know you. And there's a book by Jim Kouzes, Kouzes, and
yes,
a faculty member in California. But anyway, he's written a lot about what's the first thing that people want to know about you as a leader, and they want to know who you are. Who are you? And they're not going to, why should they follow you if they don't even know you? Why should they even listen to you? And so, it's really kind of what I call old-fashioned dating, just getting to know people and I often say, lead by asking questions, ask open-ended questions, so, and just say, well, how was your weekend? No. What'd you do last weekend that was really most interesting? Or, what do you plan to do this weekend that you're really looking forward to? Ask questions in a way that that stimulate conversation.
Yes.
How are you doing today? Fine. Well, that's not a very good question. Okay. Right. But what do you plan to do today? What are you looking forward to doing today? Again, try to ask open-ended questions and really remember that whoever's reporting to you, they want to know who you are.
Yeah.
And so sharing some of that, vulnerability can be a strength. Wow. So sharing some of that, and leaders don't have to have all the answers, but they're expected to follow up and find the answer if somebody has a question. But really allowing people to get to know you, and that involves sharing some information, and then you want to show an interest in them.
Yes. The vulnerability piece is a really interesting one, because it involves letting your guard down, right? And being okay with that.
That. That's why I like to say vulnerability is a strength. If you look at it as a strength, then you're more likely to let down some guard.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, because you would oftentimes think that leaving the guard up and showing strength and is what leaders are supposed to do. And again, I use these air quotes because there's so much what we taught about leadership are things that we understand, and a lot of times it's not actually the case, right?
That's true.
So it is again another interesting take on leadership. And the other part about the topic as well is it's like the character of let me back up. So oftentimes, if you are a good person, let's say, that can't translate into you being a good leader.
That's
and
true.
So and I make that point because it's more and more about the individual, as opposed to the job they do, the metrics they hit, and the goal, and all those sorts of things that leaders that define leaders typically. It's more about who they are and how they impact others. Is that a fair statement to say?
Yeah, I think that's very true. And the other point that I make, I do think that it's hard to be a good leader if you're not a good person. But I also like to define that, because some people think, that's why I say honesty with kindness, because some people think, well, I'll just say the nice thing, I'll do the nice thing. But sometimes being nice, if you're not honest, is not being fair. Right. Okay. Sometimes people need direction, they need feedback, they need constructive feedback for them to get better. But that means that you don't have to be a bad person or a mean person to give honest feedback.
Right. It's just hard. I mean, because you don't want to hurt feelings, you don't upset people. Right. You still want to be liked, right? Right. It's a fine line. Yeah. But I think to me, it's more important to be respected than liked. Right.
If somebody says, well, I respect you. Well, what do you respect about that person? Well, they tell the truth. They follow through. They care about me. I think respect instead of like
Mhm. No, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I'm very curious, Jen, about even your own personal leadership journey and some of the things that you encountered. And I would also so acknowledge that your journey as a woman would be very, very different throughout the years as well. I'm wondering if you sort of talk a bit about what that's been like for your own leadership journey.
Well, it's kind of interesting because when I first started teaching, and again, this is 40 years ago, there was a field of study called feminine leadership.
Okay.
And how women were different leaders than men. And what I find rewarding about the times that we're living in now is the characteristics that used to be called feminine are now really human characteristics for leaders. The whole idea of showing some sense, being sensitive to others, empathy, compassion, forgiveness, these used to be considered feminine leadership traits. Yeah. And now they really are being advocated as human leadership traits. And so the field has changed. I mean, there probably are some differences, and research would still say women are not as good at negotiating, or women, they're still, it's still not, it's still, at the top levels, it's still pretty male dominated, okay?
Right.
But I don't think you would find as much about differences between what makes an effective leader. I think both men and women can be effective leaders.
Sure.
I think, you just have to be true to yourself, not be somebody that you're not, and really try to be a person who others would want to follow. I often like to ask in workshops, would you follow yourself?
Out of curiosity, do you get response? Are you ever surprised by the responses?
Well, people, it kind of stops them in their tracks.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Like,
yeah.
And you know what? That's a great reflective question, right? Because the what you value in leadership, I guess for many is emulated through their own actions, right? Mm-hmm. But if it's not, then you have to ask the question, well, why, right? I think it's a really good exercise.
Yeah, that's very true.
Were there any sort of specific challenges that you faced on your own leadership journey?
Well, because I was teaching business management and leadership, I would go to professional conferences, and honestly, for years, decades, I was, definitely a minority. Okay. So that was kind of tough, but, but in my own college, my own institution, I felt like I could do anything I wanted to there. So, there've been challenges along the way, but I think you just persist, if it's important to you, just keep going.
Now, so bring it up to where we are today. I mean, you work a lot with organizations and leaders in organizations. Mm-hmm. What sort of common challenges or things are they coming to you with? Are you seeing in today's climate?
Yeah. I think there's a lot being written, and I'm witnessing it myself. People are lonely, this whole loneliness, because social isolation during COVID, and now some people are still working remotely, or you've got hybrid workplaces. Right. But the research says that loneliness was an epidemic before the pandemic. So loneliness is just peaking. And so if people are lonely, what do they want from a leader? They want a leader that pays attention, that listens, that gives them some time. They want a leader that makes them feel like they belong, like their presence in the workplace is important. And so I'm really finding that, and communication, I'm just finding that people are not communicating very well.
Right.
And that can make people even feel lonelier if they feel left out, or the messages are not consistent. So I think that's what I'm seeing in workplaces, and leaders really need to pay attention to that.
Right. The loneliness piece is that's an interesting one. I didn't even think of that or was aware that that was a challenge over there today.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And if people are lonely at home, they're lonely at work, they just bring it with them. And so how can you create a culture where people feel like they belong so they're not so lonely?
Yeah. And that's a great question. And that's where things like inclusivity would really
Yes.
matter. Because if you feel
Yes.
like you're in an environment that that valued your input or valued what you brought to the table as an individual, I would imagine that would be a direct sort of way to combat the loneliness feeling, wouldn't it?
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, it would. Mm-hmm.
I'd never, yeah, okay, yeah. And so as of late, when we talk about because that's a hot topic, right? When we talk about diversity, inclusion,
Yes.
and equity in the workplace, right? And so I think, I mean, in the last couple of years, I think that the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, really been ramping up a lot more, and people are paying a lot more attention to it. So it does make sense when you think about loneliness as a hot button item. That does make sense.
Yes, and oddly, some people are calling it DEIB. Oh. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, because you can include people, but they can still feel like they don't belong.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a whole other layer. Wow.
Yeah.
Because you need, so so now you add that to another thing that a leader's got to be mindful of. Man, right. Oh man, it's getting tough.
Right. It's a big job.
And I think it's for those reasons why individuals coming into leadership, how important it is them to be very clear and very sure of what it is that they want, because it's so like you think of so for example, I've oftentimes said, if you go to people and ask them, who is your favorite grade school teacher? Mm-hmm. they could tell you why and who the person was, and if you ask them, what specifically stood out about them, mm-hmm. They could tell you that trait, whether they listened to me, they heard me, they made me feel like I belonged, mm-hmm. any of these things, and I think it's very similar when you talk about leadership, when you say, well, who is your favorite leader, mm-hmm. and oftentimes those responses are very, very similar, and the reasons are the same.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, no, again, it's one of these roles where, you have the ability to have a lasting impact,
yes.
Whether positive or negative, right?
Right. And lasting impact is what my book is all about. Breadcrumb Legacy, How Great Leaders Live a Life Worth Remembering. It's all about what kind of impact do you want to have on others. And your lasting impact is not necessarily positive. It may not be positive. It's easy to assume that, legacy, what do we, a lot of people think it's all positive. It's not all positive.
Right. And I think that's a really important point. Like, you have the ability, it's such an important role, because, the way you emulate your own leadership style and the way it has an impact on individuals can frame how they view leadership and what they think of moving forward. And so there's so much, I think responsibility is a good word to use.
Yes, that's a good word. Good word to use. Yeah. I mean, that's why I say a leader is someone who you're in a position to influence the lives of others. That's a huge responsibility, because how you treat people in the workplace may influence how they go home and treat others.
Right. No, it's a huge. I think it's a huge point, and again, Jann, I love the title. Is it the Breadcrumb Legacy?
Yeah, Breadcrumb Legacy: How Great Leaders Live a Life Worth Remembering, and it's really about how to live a life for anyone. How to live a life worth remembering.
Yeah, no, worth remembering, and we become remembered through our actions. And I'll add another word, that to our timely actions. So, if you're leading someone or leading a group of people, and there's an individual that's, say, struggling in the moment with something in their personal life, let's just say, or even in the work context, mm-hmm. and you as a leader are able to positively assist and aid and help them or deal with the issue they have with, well, you've just created an opportunity to have a lasting impact, i.e. doing something worth remembering.
Absolutely. Yep. That's very true.
Yeah. Being remembered. I think I've never really thought about it from that context, like, it's about being remembered. And I've often just thought about impact in general, but if you are having a positive impact, then you will in fact be remembered, right?
Yes. I've often read where parents who lose a child, one of the most important things for them is that people remember the child they lost, instead of acting like, well, that person didn't exist, but really remembering them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense. It does make sense. I mean, you think, even with that example, that's how you keep someone's spirit alive through the memories, right?
Yes,
and so you want to do that.
Yeah.
Is there, Jann, is there sort of a sort of number one lesson that would help in making someone or making you specifically a successful leader?
To me, it really does go back to what we kind of said before, and that's ego, controlling the ego and not letting the ego control you. And, we all have to have an ego or we wouldn't be able to stand up. But the ego, I often use an elevator as a metaphor that, how do we tell if the ego's taking over? Well, we start feeling things such as greed, envy, jealousy, competitiveness. And when we feel those feelings, because we are human, when we feel those, then we have to say to ourselves, no, I need to push that down, because those feelings often manifest in behaviors, negative behaviors, such as defensiveness, not open to feedback, micromanaging, over controlling. So, when you sense those feelings creeping up, you have to say, you know what, I have to let go of that. That's not healthy.
Mm-hmm. And that internal dialogue is so important to have, to recognize that.
It is. It is.
And even just general awareness is also important, because if you're, self-awareness, I want to make a correction, because right? Because self-awareness is so important, because the more we're self-aware of our own actions, the more we know what we can adjust, because maybe there's adjustments of some sort that needed to be made, or we have to move in a different direction or change our viewpoint. But that doesn't happen without some form of self-awareness. In your perspective, what kind of things can leaders do to improve upon that self-awareness?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm a big believer in feedback. How are you going to get better if you're not getting some feedback? But you have to, in order to get honest feedback, you have to, again, earn their trust. And when I was a full-time professor, I had all kinds of feedback mechanisms. And and early on, students learned to trust me very fast, because I would say, I will tell you what I will or will not do based on your feedback.
Right.
And once they realized there were no repercussions, they started just giving me feedback, and I wasn't even asking for it. Have you thought about this? What about that? Have you tried this? And I actually have written a couple books and many articles on continuous improvement in higher education. So I think feedback, you've got to earn the trust, or you won't get honest feedback. They'll just tell you what they think you want to hear. And I think it's always good to have someone within the organization, usually maybe somebody on your level, who will give you very honest feedback. But you have to want to know it, and you have to want to get better as a leader. If you put defenses up, if you get defensive, if you get angry when you hear something that doesn't really match with what you thought, then people just shut down. Like, what good is it? Or if you ask for feedback and you never do anything with it, then people are like, well, that was a waste of time. So you really have to have some kind of system where you report back and say, you know what, I've got some good ideas, and here's what I'm going to make, here's what I'm going to change, or add or revise based on what I heard from you.
What I really love about that is when you get the example of feedback, we're not having to ask for and just receiving automatically.
Yeah.
You know, that just says a lot about the environment that's been created as a leader, where people feel just naturally safe and it's okay. And
I always felt like it was a really good sign.
Very, 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 very good sign. Very good sign. You know, on feedback, I remember once applying for a leadership role. And when it got to the point for me to provide references, I was asked to provide the reference of someone with whom I had reported to, someone who reported to me, and then an external stakeholder that I had worked with in a professional capacity. And I just thought all three perspectives, one you'd naturally expect, like someone to report to, like, you know, a former boss. But I thought the other two perspectives were really, really interesting to provide and to get feedback from that way. And that really, what it spoke to me was how much the leadership framework has changed.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah, man, this is good. Jann, this is such a delight, pleasure chatting. I'm so glad that we had this opportunity to share like this. And, you know, I think, especially when we start talking about the legacy through your book, it's so important when we talk about leaving a life worth remembering and how to do that. Because and it really speaks, and I'm also glad you raised a point, it can be positive or negative, because it really speaks to the fact that the choice is always in our hands which way to go. Right? Yeah. It's totally up to us how we want things to go.
Yes. And we're leaving a legacy, whether we know it or not. So we might as well be intentional about it.
Yeah.
And I did want to say that, you know, if people are interested in my book, there's a 20% discount from the publisher on my website. And my website is jannfreed.com, 2 N's and 2 E's. I do have if they subscribe, I do have a monthly newsletter that's easy to read. And then I have a monthly podcast also.
Oh, wow.
And I'm active on LinkedIn. They could look for me on LinkedIn.
For sure. Oh, that's amazing. I was going to ask you how people connect with you. So thank you for sharing all that. That's awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time. Like, this has been a lot of fun. And again, really appreciate the insights. I walked away with some learnings myself. So again,
good. Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Yes. Thank you for the time. All the best, and keep up the fantastic work, Jann.
Okay. And continue to live audaciously.
Will do, I promise. Only if you do the same.
Okay. All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Back, we are here on the podcast, and much thanks and appreciation goes out to Jann for being here and sharing her great insights on leaving a lasting legacy and positively impacting others. I definitely encourage listeners to check out her book, Breadcrumb Legacy: How Great Leaders Live a Life Worth Remembering. As always, the details will be provided in the show notes. You can click on that and access her book. So again, Jann, thank you so much for the time. You know, I really appreciate the conversation that Jann and I just had. But, you know, if there's one thing I take from our chat, it'd have to be this. In the realm of leadership, our actions and behaviors have the potential to create a lasting impact that transcends our time in the role. As leaders, we have a unique opportunity to leave a legacy, not only in our organizations, but in the lives of the people that we have the privilege to lead. A legacy is not just about the footprints we leave behind, but also the positive difference we can make in the lives of others. Let's explore the importance of leaving a lasting legacy and how leaders can purposely shape their own. To leave a lasting legacy, leaders must cultivate trust and authenticity. Trust is the foundation of any successful relationship, and leaders who prioritize trust building create an environment where individuals feel safe, supported, and motivated. Authenticity is equally important as genuine leaders inspire others through their actions and words, staying true to their values and principles. Leaders who want to leave a lasting legacy must recognize the importance of fostering meaningful relationships. People are more likely to follow, be inspired by, and emulate leaders who make them feel seen, heard, and valued. By taking the time to get to know individuals on a personal level, leaders can cultivate relationships that go beyond the professional sphere, creating a sense of belonging and loyalty. To be effective leaders and leave a lasting legacy, we must be open to learning and self-reflection. Continuous learning allows us to grow and adapt, staying ahead of the curve in an ever-changing business landscape. Self-reflection, on the other hand, enables us to assess our strengths, weaknesses, and areas of improvement, fostering personal and professional growth. True leaders empower and develop others, nurturing their growth and potential. By investing in the development of the team members, leaders not only enhance the skills of others and capabilities, but also create a culture of continuous improvement. When leaders prioritize the growth and success of their team, they build a legacy of thriving individuals who go on to make a positive impact themselves. A leader's legacy is deeply intertwined with his or her own purpose and values. Leaders who live by a clear sense of purpose and consistently demonstrate their values inspire others to do the same. By aligning actions with values, leaders create a ripple effect, positively influence the behavior and mindset of their team and organizations. Leaving a lasting legacy is the hallmark of exceptional leadership. It requires trust, authenticity, meaningful relationships, continuous learning, empowerment, and alignment with purpose and values. As leaders, we have the power to shape our legacy, not only by achieving goals, but by making a positive difference in the lives of those we lead. By focusing on leaving a legacy that's worth remembering, we can inspire and empower future generations of leaders, creating a ripple effect of positive, audacious change in the world. We've sadly come to the end of another episode of the most audacious living podcast the internet has to offer, and I thank you for being here, all those lovers of audaciousness and those who've been supporting this podcast. I extend my appreciation and deep gratitude. As always, until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audacious Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.